Hello, this is Yarrow, and welcome to today's episode of my podcast, the Yarrow Podcast. And today I want to talk about content marketing, as always, the subject and the daily activity I've been doing almost 25 plus years now. And it's responsible for most of the money I've ever made. So I have a lot to say always about content marketing. And there's a concept I've been writing about a lot recently and publishing in some of my longer resources called content assets. So I'd like to talk about what those are and how impactful they are. They're absolutely critical. In fact, they can drive almost all sales for an online business. Versus a more transient piece of content that is part of your content marketing strategy, but it's not really designed to have a long term impact and is probably not driving any sales. It might be having a small impact in you reaching new people or maintaining relationships online. Good examples of this are social media. It's quite temporary. You post a Facebook post, Instagram picture, TikTok video, it's gone. The next day, no one cares, no one sees it. Maybe you get a viral outcome, maybe you get nothing but a few hundred views, but it's not designed to have a huge impact, but it is designed to show people that you exist, keep providing education, keep the relationships going. What you're listening to right now is a good example of that. I'm not going to be using this piece of content, this audio in this case, to drive a lot of traffic to it and do it every day, but I am doing this every day and producing a new one every day to keep you in my world, to keep telling you, what I'm doing, what I'm learning, what I've learned in the past. I'm trying to help you with all my advice and training and content marketing, what's working for me to get customers. So, but it's not. This is temporary in the sense that I'm not going to make this audio a long term piece of a sales process for me. Versus a content asset, which, for example, a key lead magnet is the typical format of a content asset that a lot of businesses rely on. That could be a webinar presentation, that could be a live stream similar to a webinar, that could be some sort of free report, blueprint, white paper, text-based document. Sometimes it's like a calculator or some sort of experience, like you fill out some information, you get back some results. That's becoming more common, a bit more dynamic. It's designed to be something that makes an impact and turns someone who is interested in what you sell into someone who's actually ready to potentially buy. They might buy straight after experiencing the content asset, or they might book a sales call as the next step towards becoming a customer. So the content asset is actually doing heavy lifting. It's educating people, it's building trust, it's establishing your points of differentiation, your strengths, it's contrasting you to competitors. It's just building a relationship. So it's doing a lot of things. That's why these kind of content assets tend to be a little bit more complicated to create, a little bit more in depth in terms of the substance. It's more substantial in what the person's experiencing, but it doesn't have to be super long. Sometimes a 5-page report can make a big impact if what's in that report is just really valuable. Now, many businesses will have just one or two of these to drive almost all their sales. In fact, in the past, I've had that kind of experience with two of my businesses. My current business, you could say, our number one content asset is actually our website. In this case, it's an agency business. The website does the heavy lifting in terms of educating, selling our service, making it clear what makes us different. So most of the experience a person goes through before booking a sales call with our business is discovering our business through some sort of usually Google search or AI-based search, maybe a referral, and then looking at the website, booking a sales call, becoming a customer. That is a very classic example of a content asset. In fact, if your website doesn't operate as a good content asset, you probably need to work on your website. The more common, though, content asset that people traditionally think of is that lead magnet. So in my case, with my education business, the single biggest impact I ever had with that business was writing something called the Blog Profits Blueprint. I won't go into too much detail because it's old now. I wouldn't call it relevant today, so there's no reason to go get it. But when I created this document, it was essentially how to make money with the blog. And that was during the starting period of blogging and social media. And for the next 5 years, that document was downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. It was responsible for growing my email database and ultimately selling a whole lot of education product. After that was retired, I eventually did a second version of it, which was updated. And I've also done a webinar and a educational series of videos. So all those are examples of in-depth lead magnets, which I would call content assets, because I would send people to them over and over and over again, knowing that they're going to do the heavy lifting to get me a customer. And you need to have at least one of these. It could be just your website, it could be a webinar, it could be some sort of download, some series of videos that are delivered, over a week or something like that. But if you don't have something like that, it's difficult to get to the point where you feel confident in doing any kind of marketing campaigns, knowing that the people who you are reaching will get what they need in terms of your content to build the trust and either book the sales call or buy what you're selling. And this applies to all businesses, whether you're selling software or an agency service, freelancer, coach, educator, consultant. I mean, if you're an influencer creator, that might be the only place where you're not relying on assets as much as just audience. So perhaps that's the one area where you don't need one big asset. But almost all people who lead to a sale of something of substantial value, a product or a service, will need some kind of content assets to make the sale. So I encourage you to think about, do you have a good content asset? Is there a webinar you can put together that would, be the key breakthrough asset you need? Now, it's important to understand that simply making this asset doesn't guarantee the result. So that's why you have to be, very particular with how you structure that asset, which type of asset you choose. Even just something as simple as the main headline, the main call to action, the hook, the angle. When I put together the Blog Profits Blueprint, I was very careful to conscientiously choose and experiment with the main catchphrase. So it was called the Blog Profits Blueprint, but eventually it was, I guess you call it a subheadline or a tag. It was how to make $10,000 per day from blogging only 2 hours per day. Sorry, let me try that again. How to make $10,000 per month from only blogging 2 hours per day. So there was a lot of inbuilt differentiation there. It was like, do a certain amount of work, get a certain outcome using a blog. And that's why it's such an important piece of content to create, because it's not just the education, it is the positioning, it is the differentiation, it is the secret sauce, the special thing that you do that is presented through this asset. It can be written, it can be words, it can be an experience with you, but you need something like that. And it's really important to have it in one asset, because you have this moment in time where you capture attention, you've hooked them with whatever is the hook, the reason they're compelled to check this out. They have a problem they want to solve, and your asset looks like it would help them get to that next step. So that's a rare moment in time when you capture attention. So you want to make sure that content asset does a great job of doing that. Now, if you never put together a really great content asset, I would encourage you you can take a look at mine. I have one called the 5 Phases. It's my growth framework for essentially growing a services business. I talk a lot about content assets in that. Or if you just want to speak to me about what content asset might be right for your business and whether you'd like my help, I do have a coaching program. It's called Inside Growth. You can book a call for that at insidegrowth.com. And I'm happy to take, have a chat, see if we're a good fit. But yeah, think about your content assets. Think about what would be the right format, what would be the information you need in it. If you've never done this before, you should definitely do some educating yourself on, how to structure a webinar, how to create a good report, how to create a good video series, whichever one of those you might be doing. And then put in the effort. That's a great way to, I think, end this audio. You have to put in the effort, because these are not temporary. This is something you want to send people to, ideally for years, knowing it's going to help you get customers. My blueprint, my website, the webinar I had at one point for my education business, these made sales for me for years. And that's the outcome you're looking for. A really powerful piece of content that will be the cornerstone for the growth of your business. Okay, I'll end it there. My name is Yaro. You can find out more about me and what I do at insidegrowth.com. And I will speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.